Welcome back, everyone. We get to talk about another Android phone today, and this is one that actually came out last year. And when it came out, it was kind of in that, strange range because, and that's the best way I can put it, because the predecessor, the OnePlus 6T, that was pretty much the top tier model of the time. But then we had the OnePlus 7, which is the phone we're talking about today. And that phone actually was kind of like the base model or like the cheaper model of the Pro model, which was the OnePlus 7 Pro. And because of that, a lot of people didn't really, look at the OnePlus 7, and I guess nobody really, people still cared about it, but a lot of people kind of looked over it in a lot of ways. But regardless, I still think the OnePlus 7 is a pretty good phone, and even with the OnePlus 17 and OnePlus 8 coming out, and I am getting those phones, they should be arriving very, very soon. I think it'd be really cool to see how this phone has aged throughout the years, and at least the year that it's been out. And even even hating on the design, the phone does not even feel or look that dated, which is really cool. It really kind of stems, really looks just like the OnePlus 6T in a lot of ways. Now on the front, you have that 6.41-inch optic AMOLED display. It is 1080p, and like I've stated before, it's a pretty good panel. The same thing with, the OnePlus 6T and all those panels. OnePlus does a really good job at the way their panels look. And what's really cool is that on top of that, you have very little bezel on the front as well, which is extremely nice. And that's something that I always look at. Whenever I look at a phone, it's almost, it's extremely, extremely important to see how much, room you have on the display besides just the bezel. And up top, you have a little bit of chin at the bottom, but it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't really, I don't even remember it sometimes. You have slim bezels on the sides. Then up top, you do have that kind of like teardrop design, which is really cool. So you have a little bit of a notch, but not really. It's not that big of a deal. And one interesting thing, and I never even noticed this with my OnePlus devices, but on some of them, you actually have the speaker grill embedded onto like the top chassis of the phone, which is really cool. I never really noticed that before, but now, it makes sense because, there's no, microphone or anything like that that's visible. So it's kind of like a speaker grill up top, which is really, really cool and a really nice touch. So on the front, it definitely gets a thumbs up in my books. It's not a 1440p panel, it can't do like the 60 hertz or anything, but it's really not that big of a deal. I don't really have any problems with it. On the bottom, you have the speaker grills as well as USB Type-C. And on the back, you have a glass back, which is really nice, as well as a dual camera setup. Now, one thing that does kind of suck is that there is no wireless charging on this phone, which honestly is kind of dumb. I feel like they could have put it, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. But the way the phone feels in the hand, everything like that, it gets a thumbs up on my books. It does not feel like a cheap device at all, even compared to things like the 11 Pro or the S20 or things like that. This one still feels extremely premium in my books. Now, with OnePlus, you guys already know with the OnePlus 7 Pro, that one is pretty much like the one that got the most attention. That one had, the pop-out camera and everything like that. But this one is still good enough for a lot of people when it comes down to the design. There's no microSD card slot. There's no nothing like that. There's not even any IP certification, which is pretty insane. They eventually added it with the OnePlus 8 and 8 Pro, but I still think that's really weird. They spent a lot of money on Robert Downey Jr.'s endorsement and stuff, so I guess they had to spend more money on that than certifying these phones, but I guess at the end of the day, it is what it is. But in terms of the outside, the OnePlus 7 Pro still holds up quite well. It does not feel like a cheap device at all. It feels very, very premium. I'm literally holding it in my hands right now. I'm telling you, this thing still feels extremely premium to this day. Now, moving on to the software. Now, this is probably one of my most favorite things about this device for sure. Now, for some reason, my OnePlus is in some other language, which I don't really understand. So I'm going to have to change that right now. But the thing with the OnePlus is that not only is their software pretty good in my opinion, but their software updates are extremely good as well. Now, it sounds like I'm getting paid by OnePlus to say this, but I'm really not. I can say whatever I want to. The thing with OnePlus is that in terms of their stock software, it's really, really good. I really have no complaints about their software at all. I think it's extremely good. It's extremely clean. And on top of that, they get these software updates, for a majority for a long duration of time. I still think the OnePlus 5 and the 5T are still getting support too, which is really impressive. Now with the OnePlus 7 though, it really handles Oxygen OS perfectly fine. So it started off with Android Pie. We are able to get Android 10 on it on Oxygen OS. And I can tell you, like I've stated before, it's a really good software. It really does everything that I throw at it extremely well. And if that was even any English at all. Now one thing about it, now some people might like this, some people might not. And I don't know who wouldn't like like this, but the software, is pretty much like stock Android. There's not a lot of like crazy cool things you can do with it compared to something like One UI 2 or something. But with this one, it's clean, it's minimal, and it's really like not in your face with, a lot of other stock launchers or even One UI 2 and things like that. Those skins and everything those, manufacturers put on there, they just are so all up in your face, and it's just kind of annoying, you know what I mean? With something like Auction OS, like on the OnePlus 7, it's so clean and it's so minimal that the software and everything is kind of like an afterthought. The usability of the phone is like the main priority, and I can tell you for sure at the end of the day, this phone still feels like a very good phone because of that software. And a quick history lesson, if you guys didn't know, CyanogenMod, which is Lineage OS, the older name of it, which is a custom ROM, they actually teamed up with OnePlus One back in the day for their first OnePlus phone, which was really cool. And ever since then, Auction OS, they eventually broke up, but Auction OS, came out after that. And for sure, at the end of the day, I think Auction OS is still one of my favorite versions of stock Android for sure. So in terms of, software, it's still going to be getting software support for a long time too. But in terms of software, that pretty much covers it. Now hitting on the performance, this thing has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 640 GPU, and there were two different models of this phone. The 6 gig model, that's the base model with RAM, and the top tier 256 gig model with 8 gigs of RAM. That bottom tier model has 128 gig storage. And I can tell you, in my opinion, the performance of this phone is still extremely, extremely good. You know what I mean? So really, taking it from the very base, if I go and just like load up some random apps in the background and I go and like multitask out of them and go back into them, it handles that perfectly fine. This phone doesn't have like crazy amounts of RAM. It's not like it has 12 gigs of RAM or anything, but I still think for a majority of tasks that you're going to do, it's extremely smooth and it's extremely fast. Now, when I go and start loading up those heavier intensive games and things like that, yeah, it handles perfectly fine for the most part. There's some glitched frames here and there, but if you're planning on buying this phone for like extreme heavy gaming like Fortnite and stuff, I think you're gonna have an okay experience with it. I think you should expect to see some glitched frames here and there, but I still think at the end of the day, it's a pretty good performing phone still, and it's only been out for like barely even a year now, and this phone hasn't really slowed down at all. And in fact, I still pick up my OnePlus 6T, and I'm still like flowing through that sometimes, and that phone still feels extremely premium as well. So I can tell you in terms of the performance, it's a pretty good performing phone still, and there's nothing that tells me that it's a slow phone. Maybe the only little bit gripe, and it's not even that big of a deal, but the only gripe is maybe the RAM. If they maybe improve the RAM a little bit, maybe increased it to like 8 gigs for the base model and 10 or 12 gigs for the top tier model, I think that would have been really cool. But I still think 6 gigs is perfectly fine for this phone. And if you're not like a power user, if you're not using your phone for like crazy things like video editing and all that stuff, then I think you're going to be perfectly fine for this phone. But even then, if you need to do some crazy things with this phone, it can still handle it for the most part. So in terms of the performance for the OnePlus 7, it definitely gets a thumbs up in my books for sure. Now hitting on the cameras, like I stated, this thing has a dual camera setup on the back, 48 megapixel wide angle lens, and then a 5 megapixel depth sensor. So it really doesn't even add that much value if I'm being honest, but it's still something at the end of the day. And what I can tell you, numbers are one thing, bro, but like real life quality is another. And just because it is a 48 megapixel camera doesn't mean it's like the craziest nice camera in the world. That's not necessarily the case. What's really cool though is that this phone can do 4K at 60, which is really cool, something even the Pixel 4 cannot do. But I still think at the end of the day, if you're going to use this camera, I think you're going to have a pretty good time with it. Indoor photos aren't necessarily the best, but if you're outside and you're trying to take, photos and stuff like that, I think you're going to have a pretty good time with it. There's also, some decently nice camera features built into the camera. So either or, I'm telling you, I think you're going to be having a pretty good time with this camera. It's not the best camera. Even in the OnePlus devices, the 7 Pro, I think had a better camera than this just because of the more camera sensors, but I still think it's a pretty good setup, even in 2020. On the front, you have a 16 megapixel wide angle lens as well, and you can only do 1080p on that front camera, where other cameras, we can do like 4K at 60 now. So another thing to keep in mind, but it is what it is. I'm not freaking out about it too much. So in terms of the camera, I think it's definitely above average, but it's not something I would like go and freak out about. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3700 mAh battery, and I definitely do think the battery life is pretty good on this phone. You know what I mean? I've been using it, I've been keeping it to the side, and it's still at like 70 something percent, and I haven't charged it in like 3-4 days. So I still think it's a really good device. Now that's obviously over exaggeration. I don't use this as a main phone. When I say I use it, if I need to make a video or something for my second channel, I just go and pop this phone out and just make a video with it. So I'm not using it extensively. If I used it extensively, I'd probably end at like 20-30% at the end of the day. But even then, like, I still think that's a pretty good device for sure. So, I mean, the only gripe with this phone when it comes down to the battery would probably be the lack of wireless charging. I think that's a really weird thing. They probably should have added it, but again, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? So, in terms of battery life, I'll say, it definitely gets a thumbs up in my books for sure, I think. So, to kind of sum up this video, man, should you still pick up the OnePlus 7 in 2020? I mean, obviously, yeah, it's still a great phone. It has a lot of value still. My only gripes really probably would be, the camera, the lack of wireless charging, the lack of IP certification, and those are really the main things. But I think for a majority of people, they could probably get over that. Maybe not so much the IP certification thing, but the other things, they might just be able to get over it. And if you're one of those people that can, this is a tremendous phone to pick up in 2020. And I still think, it has a ton of value for sure. So that pretty much covers it up here. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things will link down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys to check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.